I'm going to walk you through these 3 dresser flips in less than 10 minutes. My name is Sarah, and I like to take things that are ugly and beat up or pulled out of the trash and make them beautiful again. Welcome to my channel. At first glance, this piece doesn't look too bad, but it actually needed a lot of TLC. Somebody had switched out the hardware. This was not original hardware, so there were just plain holes that needed patched. So we patched those, and then there was a lot of, and just the wood was coming apart. So I had to glue a lot back together, and I used this handy dandy trick of using painter's tape to hold it down instead of clamps. This was one of my first flips, and I did not have clamps and a whole lot of tools, so I was doing this with what I had. So once I got most everything glued back together and sanded everything down nice and smooth, I did want to save the top. There were some chipped off pieces that I patched with wood putty, and I'll come back and fix those as best I can, but my plan is to stain the top. I got a can of primer, and I spray painted the drawer tops and then as much of the dresser as I could before I ran out of spray paint. I was trying to be cheap on this flip, and I got mist tint paint at the hardware store. And after getting 1 coat of paint on, my son was like, "Mom, that's blue. I don't like it." He also decided that he didn't want the knobs back on, and he wanted these handles that I already had. So since he didn't like the blue, we filled the holes that were left and got an actual black paint and, got things going in the right direction. So I stained the top of the dresser, and then once that was all dry, I came back with some coloring markers, some paint markers, and to the best of my ability, drew on kind of a wood tint and called it a day, and then sealed all that with a clear poly top coat. I believe I put a poly top coat on the whole thing because it's quite shiny. But once it was dry, I measured out to drill holes for the hardware, and we put all the hardware on. I did have to fix a drawer glide, which I just filled the hole. It was really bad. Patched it with some wood filler and screwed a new hole and filled that in. And cleaned this all up. I gave some Howard feed and wax to all the wood on the drawers and the glides. And this puppy is done. This was not bad for one of my first flips. This piece was way worse than that first dresser. It was a hot mess. I pulled it out of the trash, and I could see why right away, why someone was throwing it out, because this was not going to be an easy flip. However, I was up to the task. All this chipping paint is going to need sanded off. Holes are going to need patched. This drawer is going to need disassembled, cleaned up, and reassembled. There was stains in the drawers that need cleaned up. The inside of the dresser had water damage that needed bleached with oxalic acid, and there were wood pieces chipping and needing glued back together. This was a hot mess, but this is all going to get taken care of. After a good clean and a sun bath, that cleared up a lot of the mildew. But the water damage, I put multiple layers of oxalic acid, that's a bleach, and that cleaned it up a lot, but not perfectly. I did the same thing with the inside of the drawers, and that got as much of the staining out as I could. I literally had to chisel this foam glue off of this drawer, pull it apart, sand it down, and glue it back together. I hand sanded the entire edge of the top of the dresser because I'm keeping that raw wood, same with the feet. Everything else that I could, I'd use the orbital sander. The sides of the dresser I sanded, the fronts of all the drawers I sanded with the orbital sander. I did have to do a little hand sanding and all the ornate detail, but I got everything sanded down to break off all the loose chipping paint. There were multiple split wood pieces, one up in the top, that I had to glue and clamp back together. One and some drawer glides I glued back together. A corner support piece needed glued back on. Once all that was glued and dry, I used Fusion Mineral Paints Carriage House to paint this piece, and I did not prime because it's a super high quality paint. And I did 2 coats of paint all over, and I did do a quick scuff sand on the laminate top, and then did the wax top coat over the entire piece, drawer fronts, sides, and the top. I cleaned up the hardware and spray painted it all matching gold color because I had to buy an extra drawer pull. It was missing one. The busted up drawer, I had to buy and install a new drawer glide. Got that on. Once we get the hardware on, we're ready for the final reveal. Now, there were other details that I skipped over just to make this quick, but this piece was a hot mess. This third dresser was also saved from going into the trash. A friend had it and offered it to me instead of throwing it away. And, I just couldn't pass up saving something from going to the landfill. And I saw right away it had a decent amount of water damage on the base, which is fixable and or patchable with Bondo. It was also had a lot of layers of paint to have this fake wood look. So I knew I needed to strip that off. So I gave it a good cleaning. Took off the hardware. I didn't like the poles, the knobby wood poles on it, and got to working on stripping it. And I use saran wrap because that in the heat helps hold the stripper from drying out so it can do its work and get through multiple layers, and it uses less stripping agent that way. So lots of elbow grease and layers of this paint stripper and scrubbing to get all this paint out. I even had to get a little tool to scrape the paint out of the little cracks and crevices. And once I had as much cleaned off from the stripper as I could, I just sanded the rest smooth. With all the water damage on the bottom, I glued as much back together as I could and got that flat as possible by clamping it with long pieces of wood. And once that was all dry, I could then assess and see what needed filled with Bondo. I patched a few places with Bondo. The drawer pull holes I filled with wood filler, sanded all that down nice and smooth, and now we're ready to prime and paint. I wiped this down to get any debris off, gave it 1 coat of primer, and did a quick sanding to get any lumps out. And then I'm ready to paint. And I'm doing a technique that's new to me called blending. And I used just sample paints that I had, and you're not really supposed to blend with these. You should use a chalk paint or a milk paint, so I don't recommend doing this my way, but I did the best I could with these materials. On this piece, I was trying to make it fancy, so I got some decals that you rubbed on. You have to rub very hard. And after I figured out how I wanted them to all lay, I rubbed them all on. I did a wax top coat on this as well. I used a soft wax from a local cheap store, and it did not go on near as nice as my Fusion Mineral Paint Wax. That was a nice wax to use that I've had since then. I always like to use Howard Feed and Wax for my drawers and glides and such, just to give the wood a nice drink to refresh it. And I put on some fancy schmancy hardware, and we are ready for the final reveal. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed these 3 dresser flips, and I will catch you in my next video.